Start recording. Welcome to everyone who has joined so far. I think we'll wait maybe 2 more minutes just for anyone joining a bit late. Wow, we still have people coming in.
Yes, we do. Okay, yes. So as Natalie said, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. You may be used to seeing Nita Anand on our New York Counts webinars, but you should be familiar with Natalie too. And I am Aaron with New York Counts, one of the communications partners for New York Counts. We really thank you all for joining us today. And really, this is answering a lot of the demand from many of you who have been engaged in census work and really getting started in Facebook advertising. We've been focusing on all sorts of kind of get out the count and outreach strategies. I think a lot of us still, all throughout the summer, we're making a big pivot from a lot of the in-person get out the count strategies that we had planned, and found ourselves doing a lot more kind of virtual events, virtual outreach, all that sort of stuff. And so we are basically kind of a late train. We're on the late train here to Facebook advertising. And that's perfectly fine, because we think that even though we are now at officially 30 days left to get out the count, that Facebook could be a pretty useful tool in either doing some very wide outreach or some pretty targeted outreach, depending on kind of your service area or who you're trying to count and which communities and populations you're focused on. So a couple of caveats for today is really this is for someone who is very new to Facebook advertising. And so you are more than welcome to stick around if you have done a fair amount of Facebook advertising before, especially if you have done a lot of Facebook advertising either related to political causes or social issues. Then a lot of this you just may even be able to speak about more authoritatively than I can. And so if you have, again, you're more than welcome to stick around. But this is really going to be information to kind of get us all started, get us all on the same page about doing Facebook advertising, not only for targeted outreach, but for really Facebook considers this level of, or this type of outreach to be kind of issues advertising. And I don't know if anybody is aware, but in 2016, we may have had some kind of meddling whenever it came to digital outreach in our political system. And so for that reason, since then, Facebook has been very cautious about any form of advertising that can be perceived as being about a special issue or a social cause or political advertising. And since those kind of boundaries get squishy, that's why we'll have to spend some extra time and spend some attention on making sure that you're compliant with that level of advertising. So let's just dig right in, and I will go over our little agenda for today. So to do that, allow me to share the screen. And I have welcomed you. So that's the first thing on our agenda. We're going to spend a couple of minutes on kind of talking through the Facebook ad universes, and I'll explain what I mean by that. And then we'll talk specifically about this kind of issues aspect of advertising. We already, in our Facebook campaigns for new accounts as a broader campaign, we have already kind of run into an issue, and I'm glad that we'll be able to look at it together, where one of our ads has been flagged as an issues ad. And so I can imagine that's going to happen to a lot of you. Then we'll kind of go through the steps of creating our very own ad, which really involves 3 components. It's going to involve setting a goal for our advertising campaign. It's going to require that we come up with an ad set, which includes defining an audience, whether it's very broad or very specific, and then we're going to create the ad. And Facebook has kind of different terminology for all of that sort of stuff, and we'll see that in real time. And then we're going to leave some time at the end for questions. Like I said, we are promoting this as a very introductory webinar, and so there are really no dumb questions. You'll see on the left-hand side of the screen here, there is a can of worms with Facebook on it, because we really understand that all we're doing right now is opening up this can of worms of Facebook advertising, which is its like own big universe, right? And so we expect that, a lot of you are doing, advocacy and grassroots organizing, and you're doing real work on the ground, and so no one's expecting you to be also a Facebook advertising expert. And so we just want to empower you to be able to add Facebook advertising to your toolkit of the other great work that you do. And so again, there will be no dumb questions. Feel free to pop those questions into the Q&A or into the chat box, and we'll be sure to answer all of those either in the last 10 minutes that we have reserved, or we will take them as we go. If we run out of time, we'll follow up with an email that has the answers to those questions. So let's talk about what I mean by the Facebook ad universe. So I am going to very briefly just kind of provide you some resources where you can go and do some more digging. If you feel like Facebook advertising is going to end up being a big part of your strategy, either in this last month of census work, I know a lot of you and your organizations will end up going right from get out the count efforts to get out the vote efforts. And so it would be great to be familiar with just kind of the whole lingo and background on Facebook advertising, to then in October and in the first couple of days of November be able to get right into that get out the vote advertising too. And a lot of this will apply, even though we know that the census is not political in the same way that our elections are. Then Facebook, as I mentioned, is being very, very cautious that anybody who's out trying to influence some sort of social or civic cause, it can be tied back to somebody who, and we'll talk about that, can be tied back to somebody who seems like a legitimate advertiser to be broadcasting that sort of message. So we'll provide you the slides after this webinar that has these two links in it. The first link is getting started with Facebook advertising, provided directly from Facebook. And so those are basically a series of modules, some blogs, some videos on the whole wide world of Facebook advertising. The beginner's guide to Facebook advertising provided by Ad Espresso, which is also part of Hootsuite. I find that a little more digestible. Now, I will say that Facebook advertising, Facebook's resources for advertising are dated a little more frequently than this beginner's guide was, but I looked over it again before we started our webinar, and it's still pretty much up to date. And so these are probably the two best resources I would recommend if you really, really, really want to, become knowledgeable about Facebook advertising for the long term. Beside that, I think by the time we finish this webinar, you'll have a good working knowledge of what you may need to do to at least get started with a couple of ads. Okay, I do want to say that, if you already have kind of dug into Facebook advertising, or, you've kind of tried to boost a post or something like that, then you may already be familiar with what's called the Ads Manager, which is a screen that looks like this. I wanted to point out that I see sometimes, because I do Facebook advertising for a couple of different organizations and ad accounts, that in some places and for some accounts, I am seeing that there's still this disclaimer that ad reviews are being delayed due to coronavirus. So interestingly, and I don't think that Facebook is smart enough, or at least has the technology to be able to parse out the difference between, the threat level in Texas of coronavirus and COVID spread in New York. But just by way of comparison, I did want to show you that, as of very recently, since I'm with a firm called Bibliosol Global, and we are doing work for both the New York Census and for the Texas Census, then in Texas, we do have this disclaimer that ad reviews are being delayed due to coronavirus. But for New York, I have not seen that. And so if you see this, just know that typically, whenever you submit an ad for approval to Facebook, then it will be reviewed. And if it all goes according to plan, then it will typically be live within about 3 to 5 hours at the very most. In Texas, during COVID-19, I think the longest I've seen for an ad to be approved has been about 48 hours. So just know that if you are, starting an ad, you want to be very careful. And I'll show you an example of an ad that I put together for New York Counts today. And I started to say, today is September 1st, and that means that we only have 30 days left to get out the count. And then I thought, well, these ad, reviews do sometimes take a long time. I'm not guaranteed that this will actually show up to a lot of people on September 1st. And so it's probably better that I make this a little more generic. And so I just said, we're in September. And so this is the last month we can get out the count. So I wanted you to be aware of that. While we're on this screen, I wanted to point out these three kind of terms that we'll be talking about. Campaigns, and this is on the kind of lower bottom half of the screen. Campaigns, ad sets, and ads. So whenever we talk about Facebook advertising, then just know that we're always going to be making basically three sets of decisions. Campaigns are the goals that we have for the kind of post, and so that could be reach or traffic or engagement, which is like likes and shares, or whenever we say traffic, it's like I want a certain number of people to click through to either my organization's website or my2020census.gov. Ad sets is how much you're spending and who you're reaching, and the ads are the actual creative. And there's a couple of ways that you can actually, have your ad creative. So we'll look at those things, but just be familiar that, whenever we talk about Facebook advertising, we're going to be throwing those particular kind of terms around: campaigns, ad sets, and ads. Now, we're going to start going down this path of figuring out whether or not our organization is already set up for these issues ads, okay? And so whenever you get to your ads manager, and Facebook kind of is very deceptive in making it seem like getting started on advertising is so easy, and I'll kind of show you the best way to at least kind of get in the universe of Facebook advertising. But just know that pretty early on, you're going to start seeing disclaimers like this. Does your business, they don't know if we're nonprofits or businesses, they call us all businesses, focus on politics or advocating for issues of national importance? And I learned this lesson the hard way. You may be tempted to kind of shirk that and say, well, really, the census is not political, and so I feel like I'm not advocating for issues. I deliberately, whenever we were getting started on our New York Counts campaign, kind of flagged my first ad as, no, this isn't political. The census is for everybody. It's just civic. And I immediately got flagged for that. But I already went through the steps of kind of getting started on this issues advertising. So I think my parting advice to you in this regard would be just know that whether you think this is actual political advertising or political advocacy, Facebook thinks it is. Don't try to get around that. That will only delay you in getting your ads running. So let's come back to these slides. We already talked about ad review delays. We'll come back to looking at audiences, but there's a couple of ways you can get ahead of this issues advertising. So whenever you're in your page settings, so a lot of you, already have a Facebook page set up. If you don't have a Facebook page set up, then, I would say, again, this is probably not exactly where you are, and we might consider, if you kind of want to send us a note either in the chat box or email info@newyorkcounts2020.org, and you feel like that you don't have a page, want to get one set up so that you can get back on the same page with us about advertising, we might be interested in having a totally separate webinar for just kind of getting the page started. But it's with 30 days left to get out the count, then we'll probably hope that you already have a page set up that you would be doing advertising from, because in addition to this layer of scrutiny that we're subjected to whenever we do Facebook advertising, pages that are new, closer to an election time or with a short turnaround for some of this kind of advertising, then you may not be able to get a pretty successful or effective campaign off the ground. So we're going to assume that you already have a page set up. If you have a page set up, then you may or may not be familiar with how to get to your page settings, but it's pretty intuitive. Another kind of caveat here is that Facebook recently brought this new layout that they have out of beta and into, now this is the official layout of Facebook. I'm still getting familiar with it myself.
Hi, everyone. Sorry for some technical difficulties. I think we'll wait to hear from Aaron. Thank you.
Uh-oh, sorry, looks like I fell off there. So sorry, everybody. Since we're at a stopping point that was kind of forced by my internet connection, did we get any questions, or do we want to go ahead and pause for questions, at least at this point? I don't see any in our chat box, and I don't see any in the Q&A. So just know again that you can pop questions in at any time, and we'll be happy to take those in our last 10 minutes, or if there's a natural place that we can stop and take those questions, then we can do that. But for now, let's just get right back into where I was. So let's share my screen again. Okie dokie. So in our page settings, then we will see on the left sidebar, there's a section called Issue, Electoral, or Political Ads. And this will take you through a series of steps where you'll be authorized for ads about social issues, elections, or politics. Again, don't try to shirk this, just go through the steps right now. I did it for New York Counts today. It didn't take too much time at all. Now there is a couple of days approval process to get that going. And I'll kind of show you at what juncture you can do that, but actually going through the steps to get started in authorization does not take very long at all. And so you'll go to this part of the left sidebar in page settings, and then go through the steps that will bring you ultimately to a screen just like this. So what they want to do, what Facebook really wants to do, is make sure that, even though you're going to be advertising as your page and as your organization, that there's a person, there's an American person, to be completely honest, who is based in America, who is advocating for these issues of national importance. That's ultimately what it's all about. And so again, I think we're all pretty familiar with how it is that we got here. And so there's a couple of things that they'll ask you to do to confirm your identity. Two-factor authentication, which is something we have to do with a lot of our kind of online accounts. They'll have you put in, your primary country location, both for your organization and for the person who's going to be ultimately responsible for saying, okay, I'm producing these ads and I'm a human being who is based in America. Then you'll go through those steps. They're going to, confirm a phone number. They're going to confirm email. You're going to have to come up with some kind of disclaimer. They will ask you to put in your ID, and then they will ask you some questions based on your actual identity. Like they asked me, it's kind of similar if you're doing some kind of credit check or something like that. Have you ever lived at this address? Or, what's Toyota Camry you owned in 2013 or something like that. So be prepared to provide that sort of information. Also be prepared that if you are going to be responsible for doing the Facebook advertising for your organization, or if you think someone else at your organization should ultimately be responsible for that, then you will have to provide a certain level of personal information, okay? So you'll go through those steps. Ultimately, you're going to start seeing pages like this that are, again, going to take you step by step by step. At every stage, you'll be able to kind of parse out, hey, I want to make sure that even though I'm providing my personal information, that ultimately I only want stuff to be, I only want New York Counts to be shown. So that's kind of why I bring you to this screen is you'll see they have confirmed my identity, Renee Aaron Flores, as the person who will be responsible for these ads. But then at the bottom, the disclaimer is going to say paid for by New York Counts 2020. And they are actually in the process of verifying that right now. What that verification looks like, I'm really not sure. All I know is that I went in and kind of said, I want to make sure that this show is paid for by New York Counts. I think where that came into play was whenever I put in the mailing address for New York Counts and the email address. And then where we are right now with New York Counts is, again, they want to verify that whoever it is ultimately responsible for this issues advertising is in the US. So they're mailing me a postcard, and I have to wait 3 to 7 business days to get that postcard so that I can ultimately ultimately come back here and finish out, my verification process. And so if we accomplished anything today and you want to be doing Facebook advertising and we've already conceded there's no way to get around this, then I would go through this process today. It really doesn't take longer than 30 minutes, and it will ultimately create like a 3 to 7 day delay. Really, they say it's 3 to 7 business days, but I'll probably get it within about 2 business days. And then I'll come back in here, put that verification code, and I'll be good to have my ads approved. We're not going to let that particular thing hold us up today. We're still going to go through the steps, and we will ultimately be able to kind of get some ad campaigns going, get all of our creative together, and as soon as that verification is complete, our ads will start showing up to people. So that is getting set up to run issues ads. I think I saw something come up in the chat screen, and so let's take that. Is it possible to change the email I originally created my organization and keep all my old records? Let's see. I think I know what you mean. So you're talking about basically the email address that's associated with ownership of your page. That is possible. And while we are about to dig into advertising, let me go ahead and show you kind of, in real time, kind of some of the stuff that you'll be able to change in page settings. So let's get out of this little slideshow here and go right into Facebook. So it sounds like what you're talking about is changing some of the primary information in your Facebook page settings. So we're at Facebook right now, and if I go to our Facebook page, and since we'll be playing around in Facebook now, then I'll show you in real time how to get to those settings, which includes getting set up for issues advertising. So here we are at your page. If you're an admin of your page or an editor of your page, then you should, as soon as you go to the page, see a screen that looks like this. So it kind of looks like what your visitors see on whenever they visit your Facebook page, but you'll have all these extra options, like your sidebar to the left and kind of different places where you can edit. Where you're talking about is on the bottom of the left sidebar, page settings. And it sounds like what you want to do is change some of the info on your page, like your page ownership info. So if I'm understanding you correctly, this is where you would change the email for your page. If I'm not, then just let me know, and we will kind of be able to touch base offline about that. So as I mentioned, this is where you're going to go to start all of that verification process, yada, yada, yada. Okie dokie. So another thing that I want to make you all aware of is if you have done some advertising for your page in the past, like let's say your organization has been around for 5 or 8 years, and at some point y'all have done Facebook advertising, then your ad account may be tied to your personal account, okay? And so Facebook at some point, I wanna say in the last 2 years, and it may or may not be related to some of this kind of extra layers of advertising scrutiny. Of course, in addition to kind of election interference, let's call it, Facebook sometimes falls under, other levels of scrutiny just around advertising practices and everything like that. And so they've transitioned away from these personal ad accounts to business accounts. And you'll, whether or not you've been advertising for a couple of years, then you may have, a personal advertising account, because they used to tie advertising only to personal accounts. You may also have a business account. And just don't be terribly confused by that. If you have one of these legacy ad accounts, then you'll be able to just kind of keep doing your thing for the most part. If you have a business account, then just know that a business owns an ad account. And so, for example, the New York Immigration Coalition business account owns the ad account for New York Counts 2020 and New York Immigration Coalition. Now, I will say, even though Facebook has been rolling out this new environment for about 2 years now, it is still very confusing to figure out exactly how you start a business account or how you start or how you link an ad account. Whenever you get to that particular, like for example, we went through this process recently where we wanted to make sure that the New York Counts 2020 ad account was owned by the New York Immigration Coalition business, and everybody's setup is a little different. And currently New York Immigration Coalition is doing advertising through a legacy personal ad account. And so, just know that every situation is a little different. We're more than happy to kind of connect you one-on-one or connect with you one-on-one to figure out exactly, how we can get you set up and on the same footing. I don't want to spend a lot of time right now on that because everybody's situation is a little different. So if you end up seeing something like this where you're like, well, I'm in a business and there's this thing called an ad account, but then I have my personal ad account, as you're seeing on the right-hand side here, it all gets a little higgledy-piggledy. We're happy to schedule a little bit of time with you to make sure that you get all connected here. Ultimately, what you want to do is just get to the ads manager. And so I'm going to go ahead and pause, and before we actually jump into the process of, creating a post, boosting the post to get you into this ad environment, to see if we have any questions, because then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of why we are all here. So any questions about what we've covered so far? So anonymous attendee asks, if we don't go through the Facebook issue, electoral or political ad settings, will we not be able to run ads, or will they be flagged? The answer to your question is they will be flagged, and I'll show you exactly what that looks like. As a matter of fact, let's do that without delay. So even though I had not, I had already gone through the setup of, starting to verify for political advertising, then I did get an ad going. It's basically this ad that I have right here under, boosted post to Manhattan English speak, a boosted post to Manhattan English speakers with the goal of traffic. Then I'll show you basically what happened and what I needed to do at that point. So we'll go through the steps of creating an ad that will show you basically how I got to that notification. But just to let you know, what it actually ends up looking like. Oops, I don't want to be in page settings. I want to be over here at New York Accounts. And so I did say that this is not a political ad, and within a matter of about 30 minutes, it did get flagged, anonymous attendee. Let's see if I can get back to that notification from here. Perhaps it's going to be in the ad manager notifications. Let's see. Here we go. Your ad for New York Counts was rejected. So you'll get through, you'll get a notification that looks just like this. Like I said, just like you were asking, I tried to kind of, say, hey, this is not, political advertising, just to see what would happen. And then I got that notification that said, hey, it's been flagged. So I can still go through the process of starting the ads. Who knows? I could have spent hours and hours trying to come up with the perfect audience, the perfect artwork, and then ultimately it's still going to get flagged. And so I'll show you basically what had to happen. What has to happen after that is then it tells me and everything's going a little slow here. Sorry. It gives me these options basically, where on the right-hand side, the upper right-hand side of my screen, you'll see I can request a review. I guess what I'm here to say is it's better just to go through the steps to get set up for political advertising, because I have been down this path before, and you can request a review and try to plead your case to Facebook that, hey, this is not in any way trying to influence a political issue. This is a census, everybody needs to be counted. Facebook doesn't really care. So instead of doing request review, I would go through all of those steps that we discussed in the first kind of 20 minutes here, and let that process play out, wait for the postcard to come verify, finish all of that verification process. And then, I could start my ads, but ultimately what I'm going to want to do is just make sure that I acknowledge that this is an ad for a for a social issue. So let's see, learn more. You'll need to go to special. So in the middle of the screen here, you'll see make selection and campaign settings, that this is for a special ad category. So this is my disclaimer that I'm gonna get, and ultimately where I'm gonna go to fix it is, I'm gonna go to my campaign. I'm gonna edit the campaign back here. And then I'm gonna click this on, and then it'll give me a couple of options. Remember that, or maybe you aren't familiar, but last year, Facebook, all throughout last year, Facebook was also implementing a couple of new layers of kind of ad scrutiny and tied to some reform that was done to the Fair Housing Act. And then of course, some aspects of the consumer, you're probably getting more information than you want here, but some aspects of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau have also kind of led to this. And so we just got a couple of things going on with Facebook advertising here. And so just know that you can probably disregard all of the credit, employment, and housing stuff, and always standardly check this box to say that this is for social issues, elections, yada, yada, yada. And so it is, if I go through with this ad right now, because I have not been verified on the, kind of New York count side, then it would show that this ad is paid for by Renee Aaron Flores, which is not entirely accurate. So I'm not going to run this ad because it's not entirely accurate that this ad is paid for by Renee Aaron Flores. We're going to wait the day or two that it takes to get verified to show that this ad is paid for by New York Counts 2020. I just wanted to show you how to do that. Okay, before we go and actually create an ad together and go through all of those steps, let's go publish draft items, and then I'll end up pausing that. Let's see if we have any other easy questions. As a not-for-profit, federally funded agency, would ads be considered political? Yes, Anna, I'm so sorry to say that they really are. There's just no way around that. Again, if we have one takeaway from today, it's that we really don't like this at all, but unfortunately it's just something that we have to do, or else we just won't be able to do the advertising to ultimately do the work that we want to do and to get out the message that we want to get. Robert asks, if I have a more senior level person who is also a Facebook admin at my org take responsibility for the ad, can I create the ad? Yes. So Robert, what I would say about that is that you want to probably connect with us and ultimately make sure that you let's say someone else at your organization is responsible for the ad account. You have to get approval from them on all of the ads that you run. They're in charge of the payment information that's going to go into the ad. You still want to be added as a person who can, to the ad account, who can run ads. And so you'll want to get to a place like this. And I'll tell you what, Robert, and for everybody else, I'm going to copy and paste this link into the chat box to get to this screen, because I feel like this is where a lot of us will probably get held up is, you'll be able to easily set up an ad account, but then, maybe your communications director or your development director or your ED of your organization is, the person who owns the ad account, but you want to be able through your personal Facebook or through Facebook, actually be responsible for creating the ads, yada, yada, yada. Then you'll want to be added as a person on the ad account. And so let's just say I was adding Natalie to this. Sorry. Here we go. If I wanted to add Natalie to our Facebook ad account, then I would do, which I should, and so let's just do that right now. We have to be Facebook friends, actually. So Natalie and I will become Facebook friends, and then I would find her name right here. I think I could also add via email too. So I believe we're in Bernstein, New York Counts 2020.org. And then you would want to make sure the person who's ultimately responsible for your ad account at least gives you this manage campaigns level of permission, but it helps to have admin access as well. And so I would, I guess, ultimately recommend, maybe you do have to be friends. I guess I've never thought about this. But either way, Natalie and I will become Facebook friends, and then I'm going to give her access to be able to create and manage campaigns since we're a team. Robert, I think that was probably a very long-winded answer to your question, that yes, multiple people can be responsible for all of the Facebook advertising, but you do need to be added as at least a campaign manager on Facebook. So let me put this, a link to this page in the chat box right now before I keep forgetting. And that will let you or the other people in your organization know how to add you as a person. Chat box. Chat. Oops. Okay, so I think we've tackled all of the questions that came. Oops, that's supposed to go to everybody, all panelists and attendees, yada, yada. Okay, that answers all of our questions, and now we can continue down the process of actually creating an ad, which I think is what we all really wanted to do, but unfortunately we had to get past all of those kind of the housekeeping and the technical aspects of advertising, getting set up for advertising first. So, what I would recommend as the fastest way to get started with an ad, knowing that you are, waiting on your verification and all of that sort of stuff, is, just like you're going to do a post on your page. And I know a lot of you already have pretty active Facebook pages. You just may not already have a Facebook, kind of ad campaign running. So you're probably very familiar with coming up with a post. And so I think the fastest way to make sure that your ad account is set up, that your ad account is up to date, and get you started down the path of creating a campaign and building an audience is just to boost a post. And so let's assume that you've already done a post, and like I said, Facebook makes it seem like it's very, very easy to, boost a post and yada, 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 and then they end up subjecting you to that longer kind of verification process. And there's really nothing wrong with that. So, let's say you craft a post just like this. It's here. September is the last month to be counted on the 2020 census, yada, yada, yada. While we're here, just to show you, if you're looking for any kind of assets to, run your own ad campaign, maybe you, already have a budget for Facebook advertising, but you're looking for creative, I would plug the New York Counts 2020 website, where we have lots of assets that you can take and make them your own for your own social advertising. You'll see down here, we have for New Yorkers, if you drop that down, social assets from New York City at home, and then we have lots and lots of other social posts that are in our most recent kind of articles and resource posts that we have here. You'll see this in particular, our New York Counts 2020 social media campaigns graphics has lots and lots of graphics that you can choose from. So let's pretend I'm you, and I'm going to take one of these graphics and I'm going to create a new post that I want to boost. And so together, we will take this New York Counts 2020 Share the Love asset. And because I want us to go through the process of starting a new audience too, then I am going to use one of these Spanish graphics. And I'll download that. And let's get back to our page over here. So very quickly, we will create a post. Okay, very basic little post there. I'll end up taking this down, by the way, because I didn't put too much love into that post about sharing the love. And so, you'll go through and you'll do your very well-crafted post, yada, 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 using some New York Counts graphics. And then let's go ahead and just toggle this on where it says boost post. And then once we click post, then it's going to end up bringing us to the kind of ad creator, an ad manager. Ultimately, what I would say you do is, even though it will, kind of let you start going down the path of creating this ad, you do want to ultimately get to the ad manager that kind of looks like what we were looking at just a little while ago whenever I was showing you my ad that's in review sooner, because you do get better options there. But like I said, the quickest path to get started is to just say that you want to boost the post. And again, I'm assuming that we're all kind of beginners here. So I don't think you're like me and have a billion ad accounts that you're responsible for, but notice that it kind of defaulted in the upper right-hand side to my personal ad account. But if we've gone through those steps and you've consulted with me and Natalie about how to make sure that you have the right ad account and business account, yada, 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 then you will drop down and make sure that you have the right one selected. And we do. Now, Facebook offers some pretty good kind of general suggestions about the goals for your ads, but just know that, whenever we say goal, ultimately that's going to be the goal for the entire campaign that we're defining, and you can really only have one goal per campaign. And I'll kind of show you what that means. So if I select change, then it's going to say, now, do you want to get more engagement, meaning just people to like your post, react, comment, or get more messages? What it's automatically going to end up suggesting is going to be, click-throughs to either our website for our organization or click-throughs to my2020census.gov. And I'm going to assume that that's really what most of us want to end up doing here. I doubt the goal for a lot of our advertising that we're doing to get out of the count is going to be that we want people to message back and forth with us. I can see a world where maybe you're doing an ad campaign that's like you want to, people to report any misinformation about the census, or you want to report kind of, some kind of scam or something like that. Maybe that's an area where you want to get messages, but I just don't think that'll be legion. There also maybe is a world where you just want to, get as many likes and shares on a census message as possible. But for the most part, I really think that we're going to end up wanting to do is get traffic. Traffic is ultimately what we want at this stage of the census game. And that's what Facebook is going to end up choosing for me. So I will say, probably out of all of these buttons for the call to action, which any kind of traffic ad for click-throughs is going to have, the most relevant one is typically going to be learn more. And for our purposes, we actually want our ad, and you'll see the creative for this, has my2020census.gov. A lot of our resources have my2020census.gov as the website that we're promoting because, hey, we have 30 days to get out the count. We just want people going straight there, and we just want them to take the 3 to 5 minutes that it takes to complete the census, right? And so you may have some scenarios where you want to send people to your website, but I'll say a lot of our assets that we're providing from New York Counts are just driving traffic directly to that site. And we're hoping that there's some kind of virtuous circle going on with all of the other census messaging that we're doing. And so just know that for the most part, we're going to assume that you want to use your Facebook advertising spend to send people right there to respond today. Here's that part where we get asked at our ad creation standpoint, whether we are a special ad category. I've already given you my advice to say, yep, just go ahead and say you are. And here's kind of where, oh, it says my paid for by New York Counts disclaimer is active. And so I think it is, that's very fresh. And so we may be good to run this ad today. So yes, you will end up having to complete that. And then we're going to get to the part of defining our audience. So you'll see that I have an audience already set up for Manhattan English speakers, and I'll show you kind of how I created that. Here, Facebook is always going to suggest kind of the broadest audience, but ultimately what you want to do is either create a new audience, or go in at the time that you create your ad, or you want to go and pick up an audience you've already defined. We're going to create a new audience today. And I could very well go back and modify one of my audiences that I already really have. Let's just say for right now, we want to do Manhattan Spanish speakers. And if we type in Manhattan, it'll let us just pick Manhattan, but then it wants to take it out 25 miles. So Manhattan plus a 25-mile radius. We don't want to do that. So that's why I'm saying ultimately you want to get into the ads manager that gives you a little more leeway in creating your audience. And then whenever you get into the ads manager, it looks like this. So that's kind of what I was describing earlier whenever I said starting to boost a post is the easiest way to kind of get into this ads manager environment, but you're going to ultimately want to get to the screens that look like this, where you have a lot more options. This is going to help us pick back up on a lot of our slides that we had at the very beginning. Cancel, sorry. And we want to, sorry, I lost my train of thought here because my Apple Watch is going crazy. We want to ultimately get to a screen like this that's going to give us the most options for targeting. And so I'm going to call this Manhattan Spanish speakers. And you'll see this looks a little similar to where we were before, but instead of by default selecting Manhattan plus 25-mile radius, this is going to get us just Manhattan, which is lovely. And then I want you to pay attention to this little drop down here too, where it says people living in or recently in this location. So even though New York is a little different right now in that we don't have as many tourists here, but I would still say that to get the most bang for your buck, Facebook decides kind of who's visiting and who lives there based on a bunch of creepy data that they have, a lot of metadata about kind of whether people are in this address a lot, yada, yada. But I would say that for the most part, whenever it comes to census work, we want to get people who are living in this location. If somebody was in town from Omaha, Nebraska recently, and we're sending them a message about the census, then it's just not going to really apply. And so I would make sure that we select people living in this location. That's also the more cost-effective thing to do. And then here, whenever we get to languages, we're creating this audience just for Spanish speakers, and I would say Spanish all. I want to just kind of briefly call your attention to some of the detailed targeting you could do. Mita and Natalie and some of our other communications partners have been having this discussion a lot. At this stage in the game, we could try to be really crafty about how we target people, but for the most part, we just want to make sure that we're reaching as many people as possible and getting them to respond. And so there are many different ways that you can do detailed targeting. If you are really trying to focus on a hard to count population, or you want to send a highly, kind of individualized message to people based on, as you can see, demographics, interests, behaviors, there's ways that you can target households that are a certain percentage of the median income, for example. You can target people who, are even sports fans for a particular team, all that sort of stuff. We're not really going to get into that today and targeted advertising, because we just think that for the most part, we want to make sure that people are just getting counted, and we don't want to make too many assumptions that are going to limit the reach here. So now we have this audience created and ready to go. And so, like I said, we popped into the ad manager so that we could ultimately get to that, or we started a boosted post so that we could ultimately get to the ad manager and create our audience. And so I want to refresh this boosted post screen, because now you'll see my audience that I just created is ready to go. So let's drop back down to New York Counts 2020. I think we're going to run about 5 minutes after. And so if you have any questions right now, I would pop them into the box. I can't guarantee we're going to get to all of them, but at least we'll be able to follow up and answer those questions via email. For now, I'm just going to quickly help us wrap this ad up, my2020census.gov. I'm going to go back and select all of this stuff again. And then you'll see now I have my Manhattan Spanish speakers audience ready to go. Now, we didn't go into too much detail on this, but know that you can search for a location. You can drop a pin. And so even though, like I said, we don't want to get too crafty about how we're targeting people through demographics or behaviors, then you can do highly hyper-local ads. And so let's just say, for example, that we wanted to focus on one particular neighborhood. We could drill down into Brooklyn, and then we could end up saying, well, I want to focus on, and now I know we're running short on time, and so I'm getting a little jumpy over here. But just know that we could very well drop a pin right here and limit that to, a 1 mile radius or something like that. And so, we can hyper locally target our advertising, but we don't want to limit it too much in demographics. And so think about a 1 mile radius. That's a lovely, if I wanted to only talk to people who are in South Bushwick, which is my neighborhood, then I could very well do that. But we've already defined our audience, and so we can select it here. Let's briefly talk about this kind of duration and budget. There's really no great rule of thumb. I mean, the reality is Facebook advertising, to get any level of reach, you really probably want to spend, especially, let's look at think about how big our potential audience was. It was 340,000 people who speak Spanish as a primary language in Manhattan. Then by spending only $10 a day, then we're really only going to reach about 211 to 609 people. And so, it's really going to be dependent on how much money you have to spend on your campaign. I'm going to say there's no great rule of thumb, but if I had to offer any kind of experience, strength, and hope, I would say to get, as much bang for your buck as possible, I would plan to spend about at least $25 a day on advertising. I know that's a lot, but I know we're all in the home stretch here, and so we may have some kind of unused budget that we have to spend anyway, dedicated to census work. You'll be able to see exactly how much of an impact you're going to have whenever you're at the stage of deciding your spend. You can define the end date, or you can make it continuous, yada, yada, yada. But just know that it's pretty flexible. As far as I know, I don't think there's really a minimum. Maybe it's like $5 a day on Facebook advertising, but again, it's just really how much money you have to spend. Very briefly, we'll talk about placements right here. I would just let Facebook do all of the hard work for you and get this message in front of as many people as possible. You don't have to have an Instagram account for your organization to have an ad show up on Instagram. What's going to happen is it'll automatically put the ad in the Instagram feed, but then whenever people click on the ad, then they'll end up going to your Facebook page, or they'll click through to the link that you have selected as the target link for your ad. If you don't have a payment method set up and your ad account is pretty brand new, then it won't let you go much farther without putting in that payment information. So that's going to be pretty intuitive where you end up doing that. All along the way, then it's going to keep showing you these kind of estimated daily results. And so I think reaching for 500 to 1,000 people a day is pretty lovely. We have, New York Counts, a kind of a predetermined budget, and we're just going to be testing and testing and testing different artwork, targeting audiences differently, yada, yada, yada. So just know that the possibilities are pretty endless and how many different people you can reach, but this is the easiest way to get started. So if I wanted to get this ad going, I would say boost post now, and then it would review my ad. That basically brings us to where we pick back up whenever the ad was rejected, and then to start to see the fruits of your labor, Then that brings us back to this familiar screen where we can bring it all home. So ultimately earlier, what I had done was get a campaign going just like that. I boosted a post, and everything that I was doing on the front end there by defining my budget, defining my audience, that created automatically this little campaign. And again, the campaign is the goal that I set to get traffic to the census website. It is a traffic campaign. And then I could have, another audience where, an ad set where I have another audience. So this is going to be my Manhattan English speakers. Had I said boost this post now, my Manhattan Spanish speakers campaign would have shown up. And then here is the actual ad itself. This is the one I boosted earlier. And then the results and the reach of how many people have clicked, yada, 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 would start to show up here. So that becomes a very rewarding process if you can get your ad approved. Like I said, we just started going through this process for New York Counts. New York Immigration Coalition has been doing some advertising. And so we're, at a similar space where a lot of you are. So that is getting started with Facebook advertising. One, we got compliant. Two, we learned the lingo, basically, of Facebook advertising. And three, we went through the general steps of getting started on an ad by establishing our campaign, coming up with an ad set, and then getting the ad going. So with that, if you have to jump off, because I know many of us are heavy into census work and have to get on to our next call or meeting, then I will bid you all farewell. We will put this webinar on the New York Counts website. I know we moved a little quickly. I know that sometimes my presentation style can be a little casual and it can be hard to follow. And so if you want to come back and rewatch this, it will be posted on the New York Counts website within a day or so. And we really just wanted to get the conversation going. We are your partner in counting for all things census, and that includes kind of helping you get up to speed on Facebook advertising and all things census. And so feel free to reach out to us, info@newyorkcounts2020.org. But if you have to hop off now, please do. We will stick around for another 5 minutes. I'll answer whatever questions we have in the chat box or the Q&A, and then any others we'll include in our recap. So let's see what question we have. Okay, here we go. Robert asks, I've had ads rejected for having too much text in the image. Are political ads any different? No, Robert, it's not terribly different. It's the same rule of thumb basically applies. Facebook doesn't want more than 75% of your artwork to be text-based. And so I think some of the assets that we provided on our website, they weren't really created for advertising, or not all of them were created for advertising. So some of those are pretty text heavy. It's, ultimately kind of AI that determines this. And so, use your eye to determine whether or not you think it's more than 75% of text is more than 75% of the image. But that's kind of the rule of thumb they subject it to. Granted, even though that's the stated rule, then there are plenty of times where I've seen, very text-heavy ads get approved with no issue. The round of graphics that we'll be putting out specifically for Facebook advertising that will come out from New York Counts in the next week, those are optimized for Facebook advertising. We have some great videos, we have some great images, all different sorts of sizes and in all sorts of languages, and we created those specifically in mind, with advertising in mind, and so those are not very text heavy. But short answer to your question is they could still be rejected for having too much text. Any other questions, everybody? All right, with that, thank you again for joining us, and let us know how we can help you get out the count for the rest of the month. And happy counting, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Erin, thank you for such an informative presentation. This was great.
Sure. Thank you so much. All right, everybody, we'll talk to you all soon. Bye-bye.